Welcome back. This is A RAP CRITIC. It's your boy Malik 16. And no, this is not a regular Warriors hat. That is a waffle for that plates and crates, because that's what we do. And we have made it here to the second half of our review of the classic album, In a Major Way by E-40. Still rocking my freestyle table merch. Shout out to the homies. And with no further ado, we're just gonna move ahead into category 2, which is the rap performance on the album. And we're starting this off with dimension 1, which is the personality and charisma dimension. And E-40 is just such a case study in how to bring across personality on an audio medium. Like, before you even get to watch a video and put it all together, you realize that you are listening to somebody who has a very magnetic presence. You don't even need the video, because E-40's personality is larger than the record sometimes, you know, from just the intro alone and the second track on this album, which is just like an acapella 4 bars, you know that you are in for a journey. And E-40 is able to kind of come at you like one of those OGs with wisdom and humor. And I think one of the threads that are pervasive throughout this album is this: I'm gonna hip you to the game without giving the game away. And so you get these warnings and you get these kind of, here's what worked for me, you need to go get you a lane. and sometimes he really will, you know, give you the basic steps. But again, he's not gonna give it away. And so it's really like one of those OGs that gives you like a heads up to something, and then when you don't heed it, he'll be right there with the I told you so. So that seems to be one of those underlying tones throughout the album that he's able to convey through his personality. And then back to what I mentioned about humor, he is one of the few exceptions of people, let alone rappers, who are able to employ humor but still be taken seriously. And we're talking about a high level of humor. There's a lot of slick lines here, a lot of jokes, and he's willing to go into places that make him animated to get it across, but still with some real serious words in there and inflections. And I think, again, it's an art to be able to tote that line. It's a very fine line between being someone who uses jokes and humor but still gets taken seriously. We've only seen a few rappers be able to do this. I think Biggie is a great example of someone who's able to slip jokes and use humor but still, you know, talk some of the grittiest stuff ever. And that's what 40 does on this album. And we'll go a little bit deep into how he does that. So something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats: how much personality was expressed and conveyed through this album. Okay, that takes us to dimension 2. You got this personality, but the question is, how much do you believe it? So this is a suspension of disbelief and believability. Now, this is not an album where you're being asked to suspend your disbelief. E-40 is telling you, hey, this is Earl, this is me, you know, I'm giving you who I am, but I'm giving you, you know, all of this personality on here. And so there's songs that I think help to balance that idea of, I can be as silly as I want because I'm a boss, right? So I can, you know, make these joke statements and play around with words, but you know not to take me for play, right? So there's songs like Dang No, where he directly addresses how some people may perceive him, how haters may perceive him, enemies may perceive him, and people who just ain't up on it. So this is a song all about, you know, the doubts he's had in his career, the doubts he's had in his hood. And when I say doubts he's had, I mean doubts he's received, not doubts he's personally had. And just saying, hey, you know, they don't get it, but they'll catch up now, or maybe they get it now. So I love that he goes into that explanation of some stuff. And then again, he's still making jokes. He's like, yo, I heard a rumor that I got smoked. He's like, oh, it wasn't me. You know, just really interesting takes on that. And then, you know, repeatedly throughout the album, he has these slick lines to say, okay, play with me if you want. You know, I do pack guns, you know, I do, you know, I could get, I could hire someone to take you out of here if need be. So still that gangster talk, but again, coming from a level of comfort, so much comfort that like, I'm so confident in my boss level that I can make jokes, I can use humor. So the question that's being posed to you all is, how much do you believe 40 on this album? We talked about the tone in the first video of him coming from this place of boss level already, and it's just kind of not able to be questioned based on the rep that he had built up so far to this album. But you know, we're thinking about how it's conveyed here. How much do you believe him? Rank that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to dimension 3, which is the delivery and use of voice. And I could not wait to get to this dimension, because if ever you wanted to study or take notes from a rapper who has learned the beauty of how to use the voice box and as a tool, it's 40. You know, like, this is a man that he plays with pitch, he plays with tone, he plays with you know, we talked about modulation on the beats. He modulates his own voice, and then he gets melodic. And so when we talk about free, I think, you know, E-40 may have been ahead of his time, because this album came out in an era where everybody was gravitating towards homogeneity. In the early 90s, people were way more experimental with voices and flows and styles, because everybody still wanted to carve out their niche. In the mid-90s, we saw people kind of coalescing, like, oh, you got to be a little bit more uniform. This is what gets you sales. This is what gets you radio. So stick to this script. E-40 was never afraid to make his own lane and stick to his own script. So in an era where people were starting to sound more and more like each other, this man was you know, he'll start a verse with a deep tone and go high, almost like how Prince would do for singing. You know, E-40 would do for rap. You know, he would go up in pitch and then go back down. And I think that's really interesting. And then there's whole verses where he might kind of get a sing-songy cadence going, because he just was free. And we see that now more with the new school of rap, where rappers are more open to kind of like, you know, just kind of going on a free kind of tangent of just whatever intonation they want to use. You know, you get the Young Thugs and rappers of that ilk. And that wasn't really the way back then. So for 40 to be so free, again, that says a lot. And so you hear him playing with his voice. You hear him doing things like on HILL, you know, on the hook, the whole, oh, there they go. Able to still use humor and play with his voice. He'll throw his voice, and the sounds that he would make in between. If you listen to the end of the Bumble, where he's going like, and the infamous ooh didn't come yet on this album, but 40 is known for that. And so, like I said, a real study in how to use the voice as an instrument. Then we want to talk about the timing aspect of delivery. And timing, I think, is what got a lot of head scratches from people outside of the Bay Area who were slow to understand 40's approach to rapping. And what happens here, and we'll talk more about it in flow, is that 40 would really crunch his syllables together to land right at the rhyming point. So where it might sound like he's off beat, 40 never really goes off beat. He just rushes to the landing point in a way that no other rappers were doing. Something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. All right, that takes us to dimension 4, which is flow. Now, what's really interesting here, this is how you can tell that 40 had a really controlled handle on how he wanted to approach each song. It almost seems like for every song that he was comfortable to use the fast, sped up flow, the next song he would make sure it was like more of a basic flow. So you get the Bumble where he's rapping really, you know, in his vein of, you know, rushed to the punch, kind of where, again, he's packing syllables until it gets to the landing bar. So every 4 counts, he may start off with a very open two sentences and then rush the rest of the words to get to the rhyme. So this is not This is, of course, from the same tree of what people like to call the iggity flow, the whole DOS effects or the twisty kind of flow where rappers put a lot of words in until they get to the landing bar. But instead of bouncing on it, it's a rushed syllable format that 40 uses, and it still lands on time. But he's trying to squeeze as many words as he can in there in a comedic way to get it to the landing point. But it still takes skill to do that. So it doesn't have this natural, 1, 2, 3 bounce to it, but it's like, and it gets there. And so to understand that, you also have to understand that it's very deliberate, because you'll get a song like The Bumble where he's freely doing that, and then he'll come back with Sideways where he's leaving his rhyme schemes very open for you to follow. Then he'll come right back with a song like Spittin', where he's going free and all over again, and then he'll again pull it down a little. And you see that all throughout the album. I think it's really genius that he was that mindful of his audience. This is, again, how you know that he was thinking more expansively on this album, and he was keen and hip to the fact that his audience was growing. He had an audience in different states and different cities, and they would respond differently to different songs and different flow patterns. And so all throughout this album, you get different kinds of flows from E-40, and I think it's unfortunate for people outside of the Bay who lumped all his songs together like he was rapping the same way on every track, because he really approaches songs differently on every other song at least. On every other song at least, you're gonna get a different flow from 40, a more simple flow, a more melodic flow sometimes, and then you get that rushed, hurried flow that he uses, his signature style. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to this kind of flow pattern is region. The region comes into play because it was just more of an inclination of West Coast rappers to adopt this style, which is derivative of pimp verbiage and pimp patterns of talking. And this is why you'll see similarities between a rapper like 40 and Sugar Free, who chose to come from this place that was highly influenced by comedy and pimps. And pimp talk is gonna be slick and fast. Comedy was all about where the punchline lands, right? So it's a hurry up and get to the line. And can't forget to mention the prevalence of the stutter flow. And I think this was another turn off for listeners outside of the Bay Area who didn't get his style yet. And the stutter thing, I mean, he milked that all over this album, like, tripping over a letter purposely, or, starting a word and then restarting it, and doubling that up for a couple words in a sentence. So, doing that a lot, echoing himself. Sometimes it really helped the song. Sometimes it was almost like when you listen to a DJ who's chopping and screwing when you want to just hear it play through. So, but that was a part of the signature flow, that on top of the hurried pace and every now and then a stutter. And when he did it together, that's really a head trip if you're not used to that style. So that goes into that. Some of you will still think that he was rapping off beat, but you really have to pay attention to how he marries those measures of beat and how he lands. That has everything to do with the delivery, meeting the flow. The glue here is his tone matching the way he uses those syllables, because unlike other rappers who have done the hurried flow, there's no control with that. There's a lot of rappers who have been around for a long time who have a rush flow, and you could either tell it's because they were reading their raps off paper, they didn't rehearse it, and 40 doesn't have that. 40 has complete mastery over what he's saying and how he's saying it. It's just in a hurried and rushed format before it gets to the landing bar. So really, you really want to pay attention to how he sets up his rhymes. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, wordplay and bar intent. If we talked about 40's use of humor and 40 being a wordsmith and all the slang words that he's introduced into hip hop, then we have to talk about how this is used throughout the album. So 40 is a visual rapper. You're gonna get tons and tons of imagery on his albums, and this is no exception. The colorful words that are used just heighten that, right? So you got him, painting pictures, telling these little anecdotal pieces within verses, but also, coming up with these new ways of saying familiar words or familiar things. So you understand it. It's almost like what Ghostface does. If he's saying, he's got the pots and pans, you get what he's referencing. Or if he says, I got the chop suey in the bushes, you know what that's referencing too, without you having to have it spelled out. So another interesting thing that happens with 40, and I don't know if this speaks to his foresight or just his character, he will dip his toe into some kind of, tricky territory and make some statements that would really get you in trouble nowadays, but clean it up, with the following sentence. So, out the gate, in one of the early songs, he says something about, dudes are messy like females. And then he immediately follows that, the next line, talking about, I know some strong, beautiful, independent black women. And it's like, whoa, okay. And then on the song Sideways, he follows a Be Legit line where Be Legit is like, hey, I almost got into it with this young lady who wanted to throw it at me, but she was 16. He says, way too tight. And then E-40 follows it with a comedic line where he's like, hey, it don't matter how old they are. No, but that ain't how I get down. He said, no, not me, not 4-0, and it's like, man, did you know, Earl? Did you know? So I think that's interesting, and it says a lot about who he is or how he saw the game, because he's giving you different sides of how to see things. He tells you the way to do is make mistakes all the time. That's the song Bootsy is all about that. And intent is there. He really wants to take you to these spaces that he used to be in and these spaces that he is in. And he's taking you into Vallejo, and he's taking you through the Bay. And he never hesitates to shout out people too. He'll play with the names just to make it rhyme. On like the first song, he shouts out the Hiero camp. He shouts out the hieroglyphics, and Souls of Mischief. I thought that was really clever. But instead of saying opio, he says opium. But he's showing love all throughout. Every verse, every statement has a point, and he's putting emphasis on how he's saying it. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And now that takes us to Dimension 6, which is punchlines and quotability or poetic wisdom. Now you're going to get all of that here. E-40 has been quoted for a lifetime off of this album. And that's because, again, he finds these slick ways of saying things. He masters that simplistic way of summing up life lessons all throughout the album, and you'll see that pocketed. But then there's plenty of clever punchlines that are short. So not these long setup punchlines where it's like 2 to 4 bars. It's something simple like doing so much dirt, we had lice, or talking more ish than colitis. Getting these, they're very cutesy, very clever, very in pocket punchlines. He's not gonna spin a whole bunch of bars saying punchlines, because he's got more lines to say. And every punchline is probably followed by one of those quotable lines or one of those descriptive lines that are anecdotal. So I think 40 gets overlooked for some of that because of how it's delivered sometimes, and the slang words he's used sometimes. There's so many of his own slang words that it can get lost, but the rewind value on his albums will make you appreciate his use of simile, his use of metaphor, and all the other wordplay devices, plus humor to get those points across. So I would say 40 is kind of evenly split on the poetic wisdom or quotability and punchlines, because he's not drenched in either one of those super heavy, but he gives you both of those, I would say, equally. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 7, which is concepts. So this is not a concept album, but within it, you get brief, fleeting concepts here. Some of the stories are concepts. I think the most conceptual song on this album is the song It's All Bad, because it actually starts with his son asking him, hey dad, what are you doing? And he tells him, he's contemplating the state of the world and the way things are. And he proceeds to just kind of think out loud in front of his son, with his son listening. And you never get the idea that he's trying to give his son direct game, but he wants his son to be privy to this because he's not going to sugarcoat life for him. He's actually giving him a really pessimistic doom and gloom perspective by thinking out loud, saying it's all bad. I don't see much hope. Things are different from how it was when I was raised. I don't know what it's going to be like for you, son. So he's not making any false promises to his son. He's not sheltering. He's just like, hey, this is what I see. This is how the game has changed. And then his son joins in. I think that's a pretty clever concept. I haven't heard too many rappers do that. I heard Will Smith do something similar on one of his last albums, and thought that was pretty genius, as opposed to a song like Foundation by Exhibit, where he's talking to his son and giving advice. This is more just 40 thinking out loud. Besides that, you get conceptual moments on the album, but I don't know if it goes that deep into concept territory. So something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And that takes us to dimension 8, which is content externalized. How much does 40 talk about things going on around him? Often. So if you take a song like that, that's already him making a statement on the state of things in the environment around him and in the world at large. So 40 doesn't just kind of limit what he's talking about to the Bay Area of Vallejo. He's like, look at life. Life is crazy. So he's definitely speaking on social ills and just the way he sees things in life changing since he's been on the planet. And then let me see. There's statements all around because, on the street songs, he's mostly talking about his observations of the game and the hustle. And on songs like They Know and Fed, he is describing what he sees, how he got in, how he got out, and how he sees other people messing up. Then, of course, there's a lot of repping. There's a lot of repping where he's from, HILL. And, that whole song is just a love song to his side of Vallejo. And you're getting a decent variety of songs that are both internalized and externalized, because he's thinking out loud about his life. And he tells you how he started in the game, what drove him to start in the game. He gets real intricate with that. I must say, he says ways that he could have got caught up with the feds, how he avoided the feds, how he was smarter than most hustlers, and how poverty was his impetus for getting into street stuff, and how he turned that into legit business. I think you get both internalized, so Dimension 9 and Dimension 8 on this album. And as I mentioned earlier, there's only about 11 or 12 full songs that aren't skits. It seems like there's a decent balance in between him doing all the flossing, and then you have a song like Smoke and Drink, where it really is just dedicated to him talking about getting drunk and high, mostly drunk, but he stays on topic, and that stands alone. One Love is really talking about, first he's talking to homies that are incarcerated, and then he's talking from the perspective of being incarcerated and speaking on what happens often in those situations. People being left high and dry, left to do their time alone by their loved ones, by people that dudes getting engaged just so they can get those conjugal visits, just to get a Dear John letter, and homies not putting anything on the commissary. Like, these things happen frequently, and him showing love and letting people know that are locked down that they are not forgotten, right? When we talk about content, The whole song Bootsy is dedicated to dudes who slip up and make mistakes and are full of themselves or are too cocky or just too ignorant to the game or just corny. But 40 stays on topic, man. He is not a non sequitur type of rapper. If this song's about smoking and drinking, it's staying about smoking and drinking. If it's about Bootsy individuals, it's going to be about Bootsy individuals, and so on and so forth. So you got to give respect to any rapper that can stay on topic, because so many of our legends do not, let alone New Jack. So you get a probably even amount of content where he's talking about distinct subject matter as much as he's talking about flossing. It's up for y'all to decide if you feel like it's balanced, if there's enough externalized and internalized content, something for y'all to consider in both dimensions on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the final dimension, storytelling. Yes, there's storytelling all throughout this album. If E-40 is taking this perspective and taking us through this ride as this OG who's giving you a heads up and giving you game but not giving the game away, then you're getting little anecdotes and full stories throughout. So Dusted and Disgusted is a whole story, and I can speak on how hard it is to get a story written as one rapper, let alone inviting 3 to 4 other rappers in the song to all tell a cohesive story from different perspectives. So, when Spice One comes in, he's telling the same story from a different perspective and his role in the story. Tupac is telling his role in the story, and Mac Mall kind of goes off topic and just kind of flosses on the song. But again, that's not easy to do. They're all talking about different aspects of women setting dudes up, and they're either talking from first person or third person or second person, and that whole song is a story. It's all bad. There's storytelling elements in there. At the end of H.I.L.L., E-40's telling a short story within the verse about getting pulled over by the cops in Solano County. You're gonna hear that all throughout the album, Smoke and Drink. He's talking about, the aftermath of a wild night of drinking. It's all throughout. It really is all throughout. Something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5, how great the storytelling was on this album, or how important it was. And that sums it up. That is all 10 dimensions of category 2. Y'all know what to do. Leave your rankings in the comments below. DM me if you want. Follow the page on Instagram at Plates and Crates. And keep supporting the movement as we are building this global hip hop community. I will try to tally up these scores as they come in. And I will keep making videos in the meantime. And until then, F a rap critic. Talk about it while I live it.